Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review. In this video I'm going to review Azathoth by Flint. Now this is an electronic and ambient producer in which I've heard one of the previous works in the past, which I found to be a pretty good album for its genre. It had a nice touch with industrial elements and with a nice dark ambience to it, but also with quite smooth passages. It was a pretty nice sound and it was definitely one of the most underrated projects that I've discovered in the past decade. So I got into this album having a few high expectations, and I believe that this is a pretty decent album in regards to something that goes once again into this style of dark ambient with some minimal and glitchy beats, and I believe that for its genre it's a pretty decent album that I can certainly recommend, though I'd say that with further listens it didn't really manage to captivate me as much, mainly because the album kinda gets a bit repetitive after a certain point, and I believe that towards the second half it doesn't really bring that much to the table. It's at this point where it becomes kind of the same thing and not really bringing some of its greatest ideas. But for me the album makes a pretty solid introduction, right with the very first track, the Nameless Mist, which has this quite dark tone to it. It's kinda spacey and it has many different nice sounds to it. The production is pretty solid, and I also like that you have those certain passages with those sounds that feel slightly noisy, which occur in other moments towards the album as well, so it does create a bit of a theme with the track sort of feeling like they connect one with each other and just feeling like one continuous thing, which I believe that it's kinda nicely done with some of the transitions over here. So for me this is a pretty decent, soothing but also quite dark ambient moment, which then leads to the next track, Niktilios, which instantly starts in a more straightforward and dynamic tone. It has a bit of a more energy to it and it goes more into like some progressive electronic elements with the way the synths are played. It has some nice kinda more intense passages towards the second half, which I find to be quite nicely executed with its overall sounded production, so I believe that it gets the job done as a pretty decent moment that kinda differentiates itself from the first track in terms of its moods. I'd say that we get one of the greatest moments with tracks like lu-kthu. It seems to go in an even more minimal direction and having a pretty nice beat to it with some glitchy elements attached to it. The ambient passages are also really cool and the production feels quite nice. There are just those particular segments with those high frequencies that can be a bit distracting at times. But I'd say that an even greater executed track in this regard is the follow-up, the Blackness from the Stars, which I believe it's the greatest balance between a track that is quite minimal with its melodies but quite effective. It has an amazing beat to it, by far the greatest out of this whole album. I love the glitchy elements out of it and I also like the overall dark atmosphere throughout this whole thing. So I believe that this is the greatest song in terms of balancing all of those fusions of sounds together, making for a really good mix of sounds and a track that in my opinion feels quite nice with the overall experience that the album has provided so far. After this point is where we get into some tracks that feel of a much slower pace, with cognitive resonance taking quite a while to reach a certain point with the beat, as we get the main beat halfway towards the song, and before that point it felt like it was dragging a bit too much and not really providing all that much to the experience. And I would also say that even when the beat comes, it doesn't really do that much with it. So for me it feels like a kinda lackluster moment in which the track could have gone into something more. There could have been more done with it, but it never really reaches that point. But I'd say an even more underwhelming moment in terms of its ideas was the track Shub-niggurath. This was just a track that after everything else the album provided, it felt like it wasn't really doing all that much with the overall experience. It provided some of the sounds that we got from the very first track, but again there was not really something all that special with a very minimal beat to it, and the atmosphere to it, while dark, it was somewhat bland. It definitely felt like the most flat moment over here. There is also the track The Traveler in the Sands, which is the longest moment over here, and I believe that this is another moment that, like with Cognitive Resonance, we get a track that it feels like it's really slow paced, although I'd say that it leads to a pretty nice build up and it has some cool bits to it. I can't really say that it really needed all that long in order to reach that point. I kinda admire though the transition towards the end of the song where we get a different beat and one that sounds a little bit more intense and aggressive, so I believe that this is a nice touch, but again, it doesn't really do that much with this particular idea. And finally there's the track Xexanoth, which I believe it's a bit of an underwhelming finisher. It's at this point where the album basically felt like it went into all of the directions it had to go, so this one didn't really do that much to the album. I believe that it was just an outro that was a bit of a mess and didn't really enjoy its ideas throughout. So even if we don't get that much of a strong second half, I still admire the album for what it does with its dark atmosphere, its glitchy beats. There are certainly some really cool elements in terms of sound and production and the overall mood that it creates. I do suggest you to give this album a shot because I believe that you can definitely find some quite appealing moments in regards to dark ambient and electronic music. I'm gonna give Azathoth a 7 out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why? And what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.